Hey, I'm Ken Vermeil, and this is another episode of Absolutely. Today, we have Erin Essex, a senior interaction designer at Google, focusing on automation, and we're going to talk to her about design and how you can leverage your startup in using design and making it all awesome. Erin, take it away, and please introduce yourself to our audience.
All right. Hey, Ken. It's great to see
Hi.
you again. It's been so long since I saw you in person. I'm really excited to be on the Absolutely podcast. Yeah, sure. The listeners and the watchers love to hear more about me. So, my journey actually starts from getting in trouble, and my mom decided, you know what? I'm going to give her something to do. So she put me in this art gallery that needed design, and so I, somehow got a hold of a version of Photoshop. I won't say how, and quickly just taught myself how to use it. Right, there wasn't YouTube back then, that kind of thing. And so I started getting recognized for that graphic design work I was doing. And literally somebody came in my office or into the gallery and said, hey, would you like to come work at my agency? And so that kind of started me on this journey. And so I always joke that I started doing UX before people knew what it was. But of course, it's a term that's been around since the 80s. And so wasn't doing it that long ago. But it was really neat to just go from graphic design, do the web portion. And then when UX did become a thing, I was like, holy hell, I'm already doing this, y'all. Like, let's keep going. To run through everything, I worked in agencies for a long time, in Tampa, Florida, where I grew up, and eventually moved to Raleigh with an agency I was at for 7 years. And that agency, we ran the gamut on everything. We were doing little startups that lit up your phone to the music at concerts, to drone
Mm.
technology. We were using diagnostics on drones to help look at the health of your field for farmers, which is really neat. So anyway, a little bit of everything, including Major League Baseball stuff and that kind of stuff. But after a while, I wanted to, see my baby through. You'd hand off your project, and somehow the client would change things, change it to Comic Sans, which drives a designer crazy. But some like
Yes.
you're, yeah, but you're never able to see all the way through or do proper research. So I quit with nothing lined up and was just like, we'll see what happens. Universe, I'm here. And it took some time, but then I got my first startup job startup job, not agency. Worked with startups a lot at agency, but startup job at Dub Smash, which was kind of like the dancing app before Musically and slash TikTok took over. And so from there, did their end-to-end design process and helped with their product as well, product management. And then I landed my first corporate gig. I guess you could call it a corporate enterprise gig at Shutterstock, where I started as a
That's where I
native
met
apps.
you.
Yeah, where I started as the native apps designer, and then quickly grew into basically touching everything at Shutterstock. Moved into the director role, and then needed a change as one does, and moved to MongoDB, which is the database company. For those of you that don't know, this is how tell my mom what I used to do. It's like, the apps on your phone, a lot of them are running on MongoDB, and that's what I do.
Yeah.
But so from there, Google finally came knocking, because I've been knocking on their door for 10 years, but they finally were like, hey, let's talk. And so I made the transition to Google about 9 months ago. And here I focus on the automation as it relates to ads, and specifically display ads, but of course, have my hands in a little bit of everything. So it's been quite the journey, not an easy one, lots of ups and downs, but a lot of fun stories and horror stories on the side that maybe we can get into.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely want to talk about some of the kind of startup horror stories a little bit
Yeah.
later. But I've known you for many years, right? We were doing a couple of cool things with Dan, which Dan is also just like a mover and shaker. And we eventually met up, and you were like, "Hey, well, this is how design should be done, right?
Mm.
This is the core. This is like the groundwork of how startups should be built." Because we were all kind of working together to build like a new product to life, and the way that you approached the the problem that we were trying to solve, it was really interesting, and honestly, it had a big impact on me. And moving forward with our agency, we were like, "This is how we do design moving forward." When it comes to a startup, right? Oh, hey, I have this cool idea, right? I want to build something. My font of choice was Comic Sans. What would you? How would you help somebody go about designing their app?
Well, Comic Sans folks, I'm sorry, I won't talk to you like no. But oddly enough, before I get into the answer, at Dub Smash, they had a font that looked like Comic Sans called Chalkboard, and I consider those one and the same. So don't try to
Oh
trick
yeah.
me and say, "No, we want Chalkboard." Uh, but no, when it comes to like a startup that's approaching from nothing, like and you have like maybe a nascent space that you're trying to work through, I think it's really important to one focus on your pitch, like what is your core the core value that you're offering. But I think the immediate next step is do a space audit. Like there's so many startup folks or entrepreneurs that I talk to, and they're like, I have this idea, and I'm like, well, that already exists here. What are you doing that's different? Which is exactly the kind of like feedback you're going to get from those Shark Tank kind of folks. Like, yeah, well, so whatever, what are you doing different? So I think it's really important to, even if you feel that it's not the same, it's really important that you know what's happening in the space, do that audit, and understand like how you are different and how you're approaching the problem differently, or maybe how you'll eat that company's lunch, whatever the case may be. Start to strategize that so you can have really meaningful conversations with folks. The other thing I like to do too is do a not a, there's a competitive audit, but also just a space audit. So what are other things happening maybe in like related kind of technologies or spaces, and do I like any of the patterns? And so now I'm getting into like a UX mindset, not just a business strategy mindset, but a UX mindset. What kind of patterns do I like? Like what brings me joy? What could relate to my particular product, and what could I bring as far as the design
Hmm.
there? So I like to look at that too. So I always have two spreadsheets of competitor analysis stuff. But I think the other thing too, just in high level, excuse me, high level advice is really trying to narrow down what your core value offering is. There's so many startup people, startup folks, and entrepreneurs that are very excited, and I love that. And I love the ideas that they're bringing to the table. But immediately after they give me their pitch, then they start to tack things on. And it's like, here's my core offering, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do that, and it's going to do your taxes, and it's going to walk your dog. And it's like, okay, okay, no, 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 that's too much. I think there's a lot of research out there about like, when you want to win an argument, like get your like core thing up first. Like don't tack on a bunch of other information because people don't necessarily equate that as the same. So I think that's my other big piece of advice is like really get your core offering down to like a really solid idea, not necessarily tack on accessories.
Oh yeah. When what I've seen is like we've built big apps, small apps, and kind of everything in between. What we've seen is that after you launch an app, and if it doesn't have a core focus, meaning this app does this one thing and it does it well, you essentially kind of distract your users with a bunch of like miscellaneous features. Like, yeah, you could. I would even go as far as not even depending on what the app is. Like, don't even let people put their profile picture up because why? Right? There are so many. I mean, there's reasons why you would let people put their profile picture up, but
Of course.
there are so many apps that are just noise, right? Just like, yeah, we do
Yes.
this, yeah, we do that, awesome, right? But how would you usually guide somebody away from putting noise into their application?
Somebody that's trying to put in noise and you're trying to put a stop to it, or
Oh yeah.
oh man, it's super hard because especially, working at an agency for many years and in the startup space, I feel like folks come in and like this is their vision, this is their baby, this is what they've saved up money for, they've borrowed money for. And so they're like, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I got it, and that's a really hard thing to approach because you have to win the trust of that person, and that sometimes takes time. And so my approach is trying to start to educate them about some of the patterns and things that are happening in their space. For instance, I was working with a client that was had a contract with Major League Baseball, and we were doing a site for kids to help them analyze their baseball swing. And that was one of those projects where like the core idea is comparing yourself to Derek Jeter, who was still playing at the time. And we started getting into like, well, what if they want to add their team and they want to add their equipment? And like, what if the coach wants to play in our practice? And like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's really awesome. I think that's really great. We have this one thing that's different from every other product out there. Like, this is the thing. And I'll be quite honest, and I joke about I still talk to him because he's like, "I know it was a pain in your ass." Sorry, for a while. But I think he really started to appreciate that I was thinking about him as, like, a successful business person, and, like, all of this noise is not what is special about your idea, so let's focus on getting that right, and then add in these accessories once we get it. And so that's my approach to it, is to try to educate them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you're just an agency and you gotta just keep moving along with the work. I get that too, but sometimes it comes with time. But I really try to get in and help educate people about UX and design and strategy, because at the end of the day, it makes them a better entrepreneur. So that's my
Oh yeah.
approach.
I've been reading this book called The One Thing. Well, this is the second time that I'm reading it. Actually, we're the first third of the book, and then I said, "Boom, I got it right." I actually never got to the meat of the book until recently. And really, the whole thing is about focusing on one big thing, right? If you can
Mm,
get the one thing right in many areas, in life, in relationships, in business, right? If you can get that one thing right, then everything else kind of falls into place, right?
mm,
So the way that I look at design is, okay, we have this core idea. Awesome. We should put all of the resources, like 80% of everything needs to go in making sure that this core is excellent, and
mhm.
we can iterate. Like, a lot of things are like, we don't really care about the setting screen, right? We don't care about
Yeah,
the forgot password screen, right?
yeah.
Everything should go in making the core feature set excellent. I'd like it if you can talk about how you would iterate. So let's say if we were building, it's easier to talk about these things in the context of something, right? Let's say if you were building a photo sharing app, what type of things would you go through or would you do to get to the point in where you're like, this is the core, and let's iterate towards excellence?
Oh God, the photo sharing app. Oh man, I feel like this is an interview. I'm like on the spot. Like, before I try to answer, it reminds me of an interview question I think I got at Google. They're like, "Okay, you have to design Google Maps. Like, tell us what you do." I'm like, "Well, it works pretty well. Can you give me some? Can you can you give me some data? I don't know." And maybe that's
I,
where yeah.
I think that's the correct answer. Before you like redesign anything, like what's wrong with it?
Yeah, and I think that's a problem. That's something people skip over so frequently because it's either they're super passionate or it's inconvenient or you just don't have it. But I think that's an important place to start, is like, especially in photo sharing. Okay, what are you trying to solve for? Because this is a dense, saturated market here. So
Mhm.
like, what is your special thing? And so yeah, I think if there is a way to gain data about that or pull public data or just get into the scrappy kind of thing, because when I worked in an agency and when I worked at Dub Smash, we didn't have budget for research at all. We couldn't pay to get anything, but
Mhm.
we would put like a tiny little bit of budget towards like doing a Google survey, which you can pay through, I think through ads. I work in ads, but I don't know this feature that well. But like you can do like your own like kind of guerrilla surveys like that
Oh
and
yeah.
start to get data and for not that much money. And so I think like even if you've got to be scrappy, like get some kind of baseline, because like going with your gut is like cool and beautiful and like makes a really great story for your, Netflix series. But like try to get some data behind it so you can validate the decision or at least have something to compare to so you have a baseline.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we do spend money on data, mainly because we don't want to see people fail, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, people have an idea. I think, like, we had founders say that, hey, I think that this design thing would work. And then we just kind of like, at first, we would say, hey, look, this just doesn't work, right? There's no way that this works. Nobody wants this because I'm used to using the top 20 popular apps, right? The Instagrams, all
Yeah.
of those apps, right? But I was wrong, because when the data came down to it, right, it's an older audience. They use different apps. So like I'm in the general audience, but the subset audience of this application, they use different apps. They know how to use those apps. And the design is kind of rooted. The design is kind of like an extension of the set of apps that they use,
Right.
so that once they open the app, it's just smooth sailing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's kind of like building something that's really familiar and then saying like, oh yeah, this really familiar thing could be helpful in your app, and since you know this app, you should be able to use this app as well. That's what
Yeah.
I tell
Yeah.
that's what I tell people about like Notion. They're like, Notion is an app that we use like internally for like wikis and stuff. Where they're like, oh, I don't know how to use Notion, or I don't know how to use Slack. And then I say, hey, do you know how to use Facebook? And they're like, yeah, sure. I was like, it's more or less the same. It's not the
Yeah.
same at all.
No, but I think there's something to be said about like standards and consistency that you're speaking to. And, I actually you're kind of hinting at one of my favorite Nielsen Norman, he 10 usability heuristics. And, for the listeners, you should write that down, look it up. It's great. This is what I use to like kind of audit through things. But one of my favorite ones to cite is number 4, consistency and standards. And so it is like, let's not reinvent patterns unless it's like core part of our like disruption or something. But if it's, there is no reason to reinvent the wheel. Like the example is if you walk into a hotel, if they tuck the check-in desk like in the back room on the loading dock, you're not going to find it, right? Maybe that's cute, you know, but
It's
no,
avant-garde.
it's avant-garde. Yes. Yeah, it would make for a great speakeasy. But anyway, but you kind of want to follow consistency and standards. And I used it in a project at MongoDB where I was asked to redo the checkout experience. And the existing checkout experience was 2 pages. It was like 47 fields. It was ridiculous. And I got pushback when I had like a checkout that I thought was pretty standard that had, the scrolling box on the left and then like the little order details on the right. And my team was like, I've never seen this before. This is too new. It's too different. I don't think we can do it. And, people push back for many different reasons or they're exposed to different things, which I totally respect and I empathize with that. But what I wanted to show them is like where this is coming from. Like, I'm not making this up. So I cited like consistency and standards heuristic in showing them like, here's what Macy's looks like. Here's what this site looks like. Here's what, Stripe is doing. And as soon as they saw those patterns, like, oh, you're right. There's no reason to reinvent this because it just makes it harder for somebody to check out. And we're trying to reduce friction in checkout, especially as I'm sure, your listeners know. But yeah, so I was able to cite that heuristic in particular. So anyway, sorry, now I'm going off on like my favorite
No, no,
heuristics and
that's
stuff.
no, that's excellent. These things are, I mean, important, right? Everybody kind of wants to be creative, right?
Yes,
there's a
there's
TikToker.
there's a time and place for that. Yeah,
Oh yeah, there's definitely time and place. There's a TikToker that I watch, and she like looks at people like cook, and they're like, everybody can be creative, right? Sarcastically, because it'll be somebody that wants to make mac and cheese, right? The instructions are on the box, right? You put the water, you boil it, you put the mac and cheese in, you drain it. Like, everybody knows how to do it. But her whole series is just people kind of taking it to the next level, but in a bad way.
yeah,
And sometimes that happens in design. Like for instance, you said that, hey, I'll come up with a design. I have research. I have, I experience.
yeah,
I did all this work, and then they take it and then they put Comic Sans in it, which has happened to me, to us as well, in
sure.
where we launch a site. Hey, thank you so much. It looks great, and they hire like somebody else to kind of like ruin it, right? Just like, well, that's not a portfolio piece anymore. But
Ah,
why
so
do
sad.
you why do you think that people make that jump? They're like, oh well, I'm just gonna do it my way.
I mean, listen, I feel like I say this every day. It's a joke amongst designers, like, "Oh, well, everybody's a designer," and it's kind of rolling the eyes. And it's not to say like like we're being kind of flippant about people. Like people do have good intention when they go into these things. They're like, "Oh, well, this doesn't look so hard. Like, let me move this over here," and then maybe they never realize that they kind of just mess everything up. And it looks great, and they're like, "Man, I'm a designer now. This is awesome," and that's cool. Maybe you are. Uh, but a lot of times there is like the method behind the madness. That is what's the beautiful thing about UX design is there is like rationale behind all of our decisions. We are not just making pretty boxes. We are not just pushing pixels. There is methodology behind it, and you can go in and change things. But I think what you're going to find is that maybe performance will go down, maybe maybe it impacts your revenue. And so like those are risky things to try to play with. And so yeah. And there's a lot of tools out there now that like tell you that you can do it yourself. Don't get me wrong. And like you can play with those kind of like you can make your logo with just one word kind of tools and that kind of thing. I don't think the quality is quite there yet. But if it's a good
Mhm.
place to get you started, cool. Or if you just don't have the budget, that's cool too. But if you have the opportunity to bring in a designer and learn from them, like I think it's something that should, try to respect. But yeah, it's a tough problem, and it honestly it happens all the time at every company I've worked at. So
Yeah, I think that ultimately when it comes down to it, it's you're creating this design for a business outcome, right? You're not making it to like when I speak to my clients, I'm always like, hey, look, I can make this pretty, or we can make money. So, it's great when both of those things kind of align, like, oh, it looks so amazing. And, we could actually track like all these decisions are going to help the business model and do all these things. But a lot of the times, you can kind of, I mean, look at Craigslist, right?
yeah,
Uh,
Craigslist is the classic example. Yeah, yeah.
Craigslist is able to kind of be in business, right? And they never used the Instagram gradient that everybody abused when it first came out, right? So when it comes down to data and specifically for a startup, what are the core things that a startup should look out for when designing their first or maybe second iteration? Like maybe they might have an existing product too, and they aren't getting the results that they need. What
Mhm.
can they do to kind of like make sure that their design matches the results that they want?
Yeah, I think from a data perspective, and this is something that so many people skip, and it hurts me. Set up your GA account, set up your Google Analytics account or whatever you're using. So many people think of that as an afterthought, and then when I come in to consult, I'm like, "Where's your data? Like, oh, this is okay, so we're starting from nothing." So I think it's really important to start with that kind of analytics. And so you're looking at the user flows. Where are people dropping off? What is our conversion rate? What is our bounce rate? That's an easy thing, like low hanging fruit thing that usually you can change. Like I made a small change on a page that changed the bounce rate from 40% to like 28, which is below industry standard. So there's like that kind of data that I would look at first and foremost. Then the other thing, if I'm looking at an existing site, I'd get all the data that I can or pull and like do any of my SQL calls that I would need to do. But from there, it would like really try to deep dive into the audit, like try to prioritize, okay, what do I think the main problems are? Does it match up with like a creative audit? Or if I'm going through a site, like where do I think the friction points might be? Does the data validate that? And then we're going through and like we're prioritizing that or we're plotting it on an Eisenhower matrix, which is the four quadrants on like what is like quick wins and easy to do and what is like this would be amazing, but it would take a year to implement. And we start to hammer through like priorities that way to try to like figure out if we can get those numbers to change. And maybe you need to look at what you're measuring altogether. Like maybe your success metric, maybe you picked one that was like the wrong one, and you more want just want to generate traffic and interest because you want to like retarget them later for some other opportunity. And so there might be an opportunity to shift there as well. Oh, and lastly, sometimes if you have an existing product, and I find this so often, it's often been added to kind of just willy-nilly, like, "Oh, we gotta add this page here and this page here." Like, let's not consult a UX designer because, like, it's a design. Like, we're just adding more sitemap stuff. Oh my god, and it turns into a mess really, really quickly. And that can also lead to problems with, like, getting the performance you want or the conversions that you want because you have just, like, a mess of a site. And so reevaluating your information architecture to make it easier to understand and have users go through it and get less lost is also something I look at. Quick example on that one, I actually worked on a project at MongoDB where we had just that problem. They were a startup, moved really quickly, publicly traded now, about 3,000 people, but they had like started to create all these different teams, and then they started creating their own pages. Nobody was really talking to each other. And suddenly we had
Mm.
four different websites that looked different, that had different information architecture. They were kind of linked together, but not really. And so we were literally shipping our org chart for years. And so we would ask users like, tell me where you would find this. And I think I gave them 8 tasks and they failed like 6 out of 8 of them. And so doing the information architecture there was like incredibly important, and getting alignment with stakeholders, which is a whole nother conversation. But being able to take something that dense and heavy and start to categorize it to make a navigation that people could find things on. I mean, it might sound trivial and simple, but it's like it takes a lot of work to make that right. And we often use techniques like card sorting and tree sorting to have users even give input on where they would find things, which is also a great way to break the tension if you and your CTO don't agree on where something should live too many times. And I love the CTO at Mongo, but yeah, we worked really hard on that, and it's shipped now. So if you go on MongoDB, you will see my work at the top nav there. Took about a
Nice.
year, but yeah.
Well, no, no, no. I understand because when we were developing on MongoDB, the marketing site looked completely different from the doc site, and
Yes.
that looked completely different from just the support, and everything was just kind of all over the place. And I was like, it's the startup world. it's they're probably just doing stuff right, but no, it makes sense, and it does look much better.
Yeah,
Uh,
it thank you. Yeah, it is much better. But you said like it is a startup world, and that was true. But I did the same thing at Shutterstock. Like we had a hot mess of a IA over there too, and it sometimes needs to be reevaluated at any point, no matter what your size is. So it's great.
So, what are some of the consequences of? And I know this is like a leading question. I know the answer to this, but
Oh
what are
no.
some of the consequences of like frustrated users not being able to find what they want to do on your site, your product, um, the thing that you're building?
I mean, it's pretty clear. Immediate churn. Immediately no. I'm out. And and we want to try to prevent that, especially when you're like the first time going to market, because you may never get them back ever. Like I would interview folks that users at Shutterstock. They're like, I just had this one thing where I couldn't cancel, and I use Getty for life now. And I'm sure people get real passionate about airlines and banks and cell phone providers. So like you have an opportunity, and you should try to learn, but you definitely want to approach it in a way that like won't upset them, at least immediately right off the bat.
So
Yeah.
that is excellent advice. Yeah, because there are times there are brands that I no longer use because I'm in a rush. I want to do something, and it takes an hour to do
Yeah.
whatever it is, or I have to Google how do I do this on this website. We're not going to name the website because we no longer use said site anymore.
Ooh, drama.
But but if a user does have to go to the point in where they're googling like how do I do this,
Yeah.
then something's gone wrong, right?
Something needs to be looked at, and I think that's where like a really great UXer can try to start to solve that. I had one today I was messing with. It was an automation app, and I was like, this is not working how I wanted, and I will immediately cancel my subscription after just 3 hours of playing with it. And having worked in the startup world in an agency for a long time, what I find that the clients will do is they'll say like, well, the user wasn't smart enough to figure, like, just like really kind of answers that just don't
Yeah.
sound great, and like they're making an excuse where like, well, they didn't get my idea, they're not my kind of person, which could be the case. But I don't think we should be that kind of flippant about that kind of work. We should really try to understand like where are they getting lost, what is the friction point, what is the drop off. Like the product I use today, it was a calendar automation app I won't name,
Mhm.
but I tried to use it. I moved something, and then it moved it, and then moved it immediately back. And I was like, okay, this doesn't work how I expected. I will not use this product anymore. So it can be really quick, but yeah, have feedback set up so that your users can provide feedback that's very quick and detailed like that. You don't even have to
Yeah.
incentivize it. Just like if they bailed on the product, like, hey, we saw you bailed, or like we're a startup, we're trying real hard. Can you please tell us like what friction point you met? Or it can be on the page too. Like there's all these little bots you can put in there that are included in like third party services that aren't too expensive, and say like, how's your experience? Why are you leaving? That kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, when it comes to like the user didn't get it, they're not my type of user. The problem with that is that everybody's making all UI and UX super simple. They're making it so that you could fly through the experience of doing something.
Mm.
And now with AI, it's gonna predict like, what do you want to do next? Do you want to do this? Oh yeah, that sounds cool. I'll do that. Right? And so it's the standard is just becoming higher. And if you just say, oh well, whatever, you're you're essentially just leaving money on the table, and somebody else will
Yeah.
come behind you with great UX and then eat your lunch.
Yeah. We see it all the time. Yeah, and it's really disappointing because like, that was potentially a great idea and then we just needed to pivot a little bit. And so yeah, it's disappointing when it happens. If we can try to prevent it through getting feedback or being at least aware of it up front, that would be a great tip.
Absolutely. So, if somebody did want to learn more about UI UX, how to design a product, or just maybe they want to dip their foot into the design world, do you know somebody that's maybe doing a class or doing anything like that?
Do I know someone? Look at you teeing that up. I love it. I love it. Yeah, so what Ken is talking about, y'all, is I actually teach on the side. So yes, I do my full time here at the Googs doing the automation stuff, but I also teach mostly in the evenings. So I currently teach at one company called BrainStation. They offer online as well as in-person classes here in New York City with me. They also offer product as well as data analytics, which I just took that class, which is really cool. Lots of visualizations in Tableau. I'm also looking at teaching at some other organizations and running my own workshops as well. So I'll provide some links to that. My landing page is almost ready. But yeah, but in addition to that, I think it's really important to like poke around on YouTube. Like I learn everything on YouTube now. And so try to understand the space. One of the biggest questions I get is like, what is a graphic designer and a UX designer? People still don't know what the difference is. It's less than it used to be, which is awesome. But if you don't understand that difference, like start to learn about that as well. And yeah, there's lots of resources, lots of TikTok channels. Like I love seeing all the UX content on there as well.
Awesome, awesome. So, how would our audience be able to get in contact with you? Let's say if they wanted to build something or just say hi.
Yeah, well, just say hi. The easiest way is through LinkedIn. Definitely check me out there. Just plug in Erin Essex, and you'll see me there in my like serious leather coat look. It's a vibe, yeah. But also, I'm currently restructuring my website a little bit, so it's got a little construction dust on it. But erinessex.com will have a lot of resources and things that I'm doing, as well as talks and other classes and workshops and things. So that would be a great resource as well. Oh, and through LinkedIn, you will see that I'm hosting like office hours. It's my 100 Strangers project where anybody
Hmm,
can just sign up to talk to me. I have no idea what they're going to talk about. And so it's to expand my network, maybe learn from them. They can learn from me. But it's been a really great thing so far. I love hearing what's happening in the marketplace, what people are worried about. There's just a lot of worry right now in tech,
hmm,
understandably. And so I love doing that too and increasing my network, like I said.
absolutely. Well, you heard her. Please follow her, find her on LinkedIn, sign up for her classes. I've known Erin for a while. She gets all the highest marks, A's all around. And
Thank you.
no, that's other stuff, right? Like for me, I'm coming from a tech background, and we I kind of like do a little bit of everything, but like in my T, like the bottom part is development, tech, all that stuff. I also understand like great UX, great design, when I see it.
You're too
Um,
kind. Yes.
oh, thank you.
I did forget one thing, and yes, I
Oh,
have
yeah,
known you
sure.
for a while, and I like respect is all around, very mutual. I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned this at the top, the title interaction designer, which you will see on my LinkedIn. A lot of folks think that that means like an animation designer or things like that. That is something that Google is starting to use more for UX design. I know online it says
Mm,
it's like its own unique discipline, but it does equate to UX design, at least in Google world. So I'm used a little bit more like that in the future. So just want to clear that up just in case.
oh yeah, yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, interaction.
Yeah.
I remember when you were like, "Oh, I'm interaction design." I was like, "Oh, is she coding now?"
Yeah.
But yeah, it might make more sense to call it interaction designer because the the actual work on the ground
The
that's being
breadth
done,
of
it's
everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's our episode. Thank you, Erin, for joining us. Hopefully, everybody does reach out to you, and hopefully, we can have you back on the show sometime soon.
Yeah, Ken. Well, this is so fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity and really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. And thank you for listening and watching. That is our episode of Absolutely. And if you have any questions or if you would like to be on the show, please email ken@vermilionsky.com and we'll see if it'll work. All right. Take care.